Chapter 23. Cale tightened his jaw and scanned the dim horizon. A sliver of the sun seeped between the clouds, clawing its red fingers across the sky, as if fighting its descent. And then it was gone. Night painted the terrain in varied shades of charcoal gray, except for the faint, eerie glow emitting from the earth beyond the castle. Its unnatural olive light lengthened the shadows and plagued him. The prince chuckled at Desmond's ridiculous tale, a venture Desmond swore his father and him had endured in the Zaryeb desert hundreds of miles to the west, a venture no doubt at the expense of the inhabitants of Zazur. "Oh, that's enough!" Vian twirled his cap on his fingers. Cale tightened his jaw. "One more?" Desmond took a swig from his water skin and wiped his mouth. "Okay, one more." Vian yawned, stretching atop his blanket. "Well, this story was passed down to me by my uncle, Lord Ramiro." Desmond rocked backward. His blue eyes sparkled in mischief delight. "You see, my great-great-grandfather had several lovely daughters." "Are you drinking mead?" Cale eyed Desmond's waterskin. Did he detect a whiff of fermented honey? "No, and don't interrupt." Desmond grunted. He capped his waterskin and stuffed it into his pack. Turning to face Vian, he continued, "These young virgins were so enthralled with the legend of the unicorn, they had decided they would be the first to capture one. They knew that only a virgin could actually beckon one. Thus they absolutely refused the thought of marriage. They would sneak out and go in search of them for nights on end. Well, one night they met a most handsome man named Nock. They forgot about the unicorns and became mesmerized by him instead. He invited the ladies to dine in his castle. He entertained them with wine and dance. He was, in every way, genteel and regal, but an ominous curse weighed heavily on his soul. Little did these love-struck maidens know, he was cursed to survive on the blood of virgins. The young women were never seen again, but some say they heard their screams as he drained the blood from their bodies." Vian stared at Desmond. "That's not true, is it?" "True or not, this story has always quickened the heart of any reluctant virgin and sped them towards marriage." Desmond glanced across the camp. "Perhaps I need to share this tale with her." Cale followed his gaze to where Ayianna lay, curled up in a ball, looking wretched and alone without Liam. At least she had Desmond, even if he was an arrogant boor. But the thought left him nauseated. Why did her elven father betroth her to someone as despicable as Desmond? But her father was dead now. Why would she continue with such a match? What did she see in him? Surely she could do better. "Well, it's a good thing we aren't virgins, then." Vian plopped his cap over his face. "We wouldn't want to worry about someone emptying us of our blood." Desmond doubled over with laughter. Vian joined him, but humor had evaporated from his voice. Cale shifted away from the others, pulling the wool blanket over his shoulders. His gaze rested on the withered tree at the edge of their campsite. No breeze whistled through its twisted limbs. Dead. Nothing lived in Nganjo, except the dead. How long had the land been cursed? His thoughts drifted back to his wife and son, their warm smiles fading. His carefully buried grief exploded in his chest. Was the shadow god bent on tormenting him? Was it not enough he had lost his wife already, but to lose his son and sister too? Cale shut his eyes against the rising anger. The images flooded his mind for the 1000th time. The imp carcasses, his sister's throat slashed, his son's mangled body. He had failed them. Taryn had put up a good fight, but one person against so many. The vow of friendship twisted his heart as he saw his best friend's headless body again. Cale opened his eyes as bitterness rose like bile in his throat. He took a deep breath and forced his feelings into a dark corner. He didn't have time for sorrow or self-pity. He glanced at the darkened sky and vowed to Osarin, if he was even listening, he'd never love again. The night progressed without incident. A breeze picked up and moaned through the stark trees. He scanned the area for movement, but found none. He refused to reach beyond his sight. With the pocked cliffs at their back, the only thing that stood between them and the abyss was the old castle and a few outlying buildings. Who had built the castle? Had Steigen survived? Where were all the exiled creatures? Perhaps the queen of the underworld made her abode here rather than the depths of the abyss. Too many questions and not enough answers. Kale shifted between the gnarled tree roots, but their knots still managed to poke his back. He glanced at the others. None remained awake. His own eyelids drooped. He should keep watch, but exhaustion muddled his thoughts. He closed his heavy eyes. Rest. That's what he needed. Kale jolted awake. Vian's pale face hovered over him. "It's Ayianna! She's gone!" "What do you mean, gone?" Kale sprang to his feet and glanced around the campsite as he gathered his bearings. He caught sight of her wool blanket discarded a few yards away. "Ayianna!" Desmond shouted in the distance. "Tell the fool to hush! He'll bring the abyss upon us!" Kale snapped, trying to keep his own voice down. Desmond stormed into the campsite. "I am going to kill her." "Keep your voice down. She wouldn't have gone off by herself." Kale peered into the green-yellow glow immersing Nganjo. "Traipsing alone all over the countryside. Remember Dagmar? That was different." Kale dumped his blanket on his pack. "She wouldn't have gone off on her own in a place like this." "Maybe she had to, you know," the prince shrugged, his face flushing as red as his hair. "Relieve herself." "Well, let's spread out. We can find her quicker that way," Desmond said. Vian nodded. "I'll go with Desmond. And Kale, you can go that way." "Spread out, right." Kale shook his head. He had never met anyone so spineless. And this was supposed to be the next king of Badara? He looked back over his shoulder at Desmond. "And no shouting. She couldn't have gone far." Ayianna mounted the steps of the castle. She did not know what had awakened her. Perhaps a soft melody or a gentle touch. Maybe she was dreaming. A dark splendor called to her, drew her near. She desired it. It beckoned and she pursued. She was the huntress. Where was her quarry? She glided through the halls. Torches sprang to life as she passed by, giving light for her passage and then quickly extinguishing. She caught flashes of crude stonework and faded tapestries. But her intent was farther ahead. The air chilled the deeper she went, cooling the perspiration on her skin. She welcomed the cold against the heat rushing through her body. She was getting closer. At the end of the hall, 2 double doors graced the wall, disappearing into the darkness above. She pressed against them, and they swung open silently. A fire burned in a large stone hearth, flooding her vision with light, but the air remained cold. The brick walls and the polished floor gleamed. The room was barren, except for a small couch in front of the fire. "How pleased I'm to finally meet you," a voice said. "You have no idea how dreadfully lonely it can be here." Ayianna turned. A handsome gentleman dressed in burgundy and black stood before her. A grin broke his sallow face as he gazed at her. His bright, hungry eyes swallowed her whole, and she dared not look away. Fever burned in her veins. Why was she so hot? Was she sick? She stepped closer. "Who are you?" "Do you not know? I am the object of your desire, pretty one." Yes, she desired him, yet somewhere deep in her soul a faint warning repulsed her. She shouldn't be here. "Come, recline by the fire. It is rather chilly." Ayianna glided toward the hearth, the attraction growing stronger, the air growing colder. She shivered, but welcomed the icy breath on her feverish skin. Inside the room, a layer of ice covered the bricks, sweating and creating ribbons of icicles down the wall, pooling and refreezing along the floor. Was she dreaming? Soft music slithered through the air and tugged at her. She glanced up at him. Or perhaps my lady would like to dance. He stepped to her side and held out his hand. She could scarcely breathe. She slid her hand into his skin cool against hers, soothing the fever raging in her body. He never broke her gaze as they waltzed around the room. He drew her closer, so close she could feel his pulse race. At the edge of the cliffs, Desmond, Cale, and Vian regrouped. No sign of Ayianna. Cale clenched his teeth. How could she be so foolish? Vian yelped, "There's a light in the castle!" Desmond gasped, "She wouldn't." "We are not alone," Cale said. Shadowy objects bobbed across the barren land, going in and out of the stone dwellings surrounding the castle. "What is she doing in there?" Desmond asked. "Women!" The men rushed to the castle. They darted between boulders and scraggly nude trees. Cale slowed as he reached a wide river. Its sluggish waters wended their way through the rocky terrain and separated them from the castle. Farther down, a stone bridge rose from the riverbanks. A chill ran down Cale's spine as a thought pricked his mind. "Desmond, is Ayianna a virgin?" Cale asked as they reached the bridge. Desmond raised his eyebrows. "Pardon me?" "Well, you two are betrothed, and you don't strike me as the kind of man who likes to wait." "That is none of your business." "Believe me, I'd rather not know. But what if your uncle's tale was true? Look!" Cale pointed to a large boulder in front of the bridge with a faded inscription. Characters of an ancient language had been etched into the rock. "What is that?" Vian bent over, his hands on his knees, and took deep breaths. "It's Tachil." Cale studied the characters. Vian peered closer. "It looks like a drunken chicken with a hammer wrote that." "I thought that all royalty was schooled in the ancient arts and languages." "I might have missed that class," Vian said, his face coloring. "What does it say?" Desmond asked. "Kota wisil twams, iser wilith ulin, rusa user wilith, lechin tachiu, tautin nak." Cale read out loud. Desmond placed his hands on his hips. "In the common tongue, you don't have to flaunt your knowledge." Cale rubbed his nose. A sour smell like a clogged privy rolled up from the river and burned his eyes. "For the most part, it states that Lord Knock welcomes you and warns you can never leave." "That's impossible!" Desmond's eyes widened. "It was only a fable." Vian covered his nose with the edge of his cloak. "What is that smell?" Cale unsheathed his sword and started across the bridge. His elven senses stretched out before him, searching for the familiar essence of Ayianna. Nothing. What if they were too late? Cale shoved his doubts aside and tried to remember everything he had read about Nganjo. "But the sign!" Vian ran up behind him. "What about the sign? If we cross this bridge, we won't be able to leave." "We will worry about that later." Cale glanced into the strange river as he rushed past. His eyes stung and watered from its stench. Thick waters churned through the channels. Corpses of men and women of all races rolled beneath the poisoned waves. He caught only glimpses of their bloated and discolored faces stricken and frozen in horror. He averted his eyes. "Dead people! In the river!" Vian blurted out. "Quiet, you fool!" Cale ducked behind one of the giant pillars jutting up from the ground and waited for the others to join him. "Oh," Vian slumped against the pillar, "we are going to die." Cale ignored him and scanned the castle grounds. Large stone steps led up to a great doorway. No guarded gate, no heavy door, no barricade built to keep trespassers out. He could sense nothing but a great void. What would possess Ayianna to enter the castle? What if she hadn't come this way? Cale inhaled and tightened his grip on the sword's hilt. She'd better be in there, or they'd risk waking the residing evil for nothing. He turned to Vian. "I'll go first," Cale whispered and scanned the area again. "Where's Desmond?" "He was right behind me." Vian glanced over his shoulder. "Never mind." Cale inched around the pillar. "Once I reach the stairs, you follow." Vian raised his eyebrows but nodded. Cale sprinted from his hiding place and slammed into a giant troll holding a crude mace. "Where did he come from?" Cale dodged a swipe of the troll's weapon. "Who cares? Just get rid of him!" Desmond appeared suddenly from behind a pillar next to the castle steps. "Me?" Cale jumped out of the way from another swing as the mace swooshed past his ear. "He doesn't look too bright to me, or fast." Vian peered from the side of the pillar. "Maybe you could outrun him." "You slay the troll and I'll go rescue the girl." Desmond bounded up the steps. "Vian!" Cale yelled. "Oh no, I don't slay trolls." "Just distract it." Cale swung, but his sword bounced off the troll's thicky, bumpy skin. The troll laughed. Its booming voice echoed off the surrounding cliffs. "How?" "Figure it out!" Throw rocks at it or something. Kale rolled to the side as his troll's stubby foot nearly squashed him. Vian scooped up a large rock and threw it at the troll. The stone thumped against its face and bounced off. The troll shook its head and turned its beady eyes toward him. Kale, your plan? The troll lumbered toward Vian. Its footsteps thundered in the eerie stillness, kicking up plumes of dust. The prince darted behind a pillar across the courtyard. Kale grabbed his longbow and nocked an arrow, waiting for an opening. Any day now, Vian yelled, weaving between pillars. The troll bounded after him. Kale leveled the arrow, but couldn't get a clean shot. Vian dodged the troll's mace, but tripped. He hit the ground hard, and the troll's gnarled fingers enclosed on him. The monster's pocked face broke into a toothless grin as it swung Vian by the foot. Now would be a good time, Vian shouted. He flailed his fists against the troll's rough hide. Kale sent the first arrow flying into the creature's neck. The troll gagged and gasped. It dropped Vian as it scratched at the embedded arrow. Kale aimed his next arrow at the monster's eye. The arrow plunged into its soft target, sinking deep into the troll's small brain. The troll roared and collapsed. Vian stood and dusted his clothes. He glared at Kale, his face as red as his hair. Never, ever use me as a distraction again. Come on! Kale dashed up the steps.